This is the Battle of the Nudes by Antonio Pollaiuolo. It's an engraving, and we have two engravings to compare. This one and Martin Schongauer's The Temptation of St. Anthony, and each is an example of, uh, of its culture. This one you see 10 figures, male nudes, that are engaged in fighting. They're very linear, as the emphasis is on the outline of each figure. It's a darker line than any of the internal lines that are rendered. It looks as though this is not really realistic. I mean, each pose seems kind of artificially drawn, and it is. It's artificial. The purpose of this, I think, is really to demonstrate the artist's ability to render a figure and to show the muscles, and not really uh, showing an actual fight. If you look at the figures, for example, this silhouette of this figure here, if you were to trace it and then flip the tracing over, it would fit the silhouette of this figure. This one here is a flip over version of this one. This one is flipped over version of this one, so that given the same outline, two different images could be made. One seen from the front, the other seen from the back, so that you can see the muscles on the front and the muscles on the back. It's a demonstration piece. As such, it's an interesting thing. The modeling on the interior of the figures is all similar, and it's a similar level of tone, a little bit of darkness, a little bit of light, and not very much contrast in it. You can see where the muscles are, but there's no indication of tone for the sake of showing the volume of the figure. That is, when you see a torso as a volume in space, when light hits it, it creates a highlight and a shadow, and you can see the entire volume. Here, the only light and shadow is within each muscle, and so you don't see the figures are relatively flat. You don't see that roundness, but and that's another indication that it's not for that. It's not to show real people in real space. It looks kind of flat. Each there's the overlapping of the figures is all the indication that one thing is in front of the other. Otherwise, they seem to be all just almost like cutouts. The nearest thing I can think of is the red figure vase painting that the Greeks had, where the silhouette of a figure is very, very strong, whereas the internal details are minimized. As such, I mean, as a demonstration, you can think of Pollaiuolo as having made this, and I think this is maybe the only one that they have of his. He mainly did paintings. I think he did some sculpture, but his in this instance of an engraving, it might be that he was using this as a kind of a demonstration thing, something he could print up and show people what his work looks like, so that he can say, yes, I can do figures. If I can do these, I can do anything you want. It also has an interesting background. There's this cornfield. It's rendered in a much stronger dark light than any of the figures, and it creates that backdrop for everything. The whole thing has a kind of almost like a tapestry, a uniform tonality of texture to it. If you want to compare this to the Schongauer, this is very, very Italian. The figures are idealized. They don't look like particular people. They look like an ideal, even though they're their faces. If you look up close, you can look up close at faces. He's attempted to create an indication of emotion on their faces, but in a stylistic sort of way, or a stylized sort of way. And but the figures themselves are idealized. They're not particular people. Each one, they all look like the same person seen from different points of view. If you remember Schongauer's work, I mean, it is a work of imagination. Each of the monsters in it are all are typical of what you think of as the northern artist, or something a northern artist would do, in that there's, imagine all sorts of different monsters and create them looking realistic, and having a particular person. The saint is represented as a particular person, whereas Pollaiuolo has these idealized figures, rendering their muscles and details, to show off that he can do this. But there's nothing particular about them as far as the scene goes. The weapons and such are probably just an excuse to show the figures in these poses. Okay, next we have Ghirlandaio. Ghirlandaio is the teacher of Michelangelo. We'll see Michelangelo later, but I want to talk about this chapel that Ghirlandaio painted. It's called the Sassetti Chapel. It's in Florence. If we look up a little bit closer here, this is the interior of a chapel. It has a vaulted ceiling. It's got this Gothic arch out here. And they have this wall that's painted into these registers. There's a big panel here. There's a big area up here inside the arch. And then there's a panel painting at the bottom with two donors on either side. We're going to look at the panel painting as one work, and we're going to see just this part in the arch as another. The program of the frescoes on the wall are of the life of St. Francis. And in this top picture, we see St. Francis kneeling on the throne of the Pope. He's being blessed by the Pope and given credibility as his order is given the sanction of the church. And he's surrounded by representatives of his orders and representatives of the bishops in Rome, and there's a ceremony that's occurring right here. But in addition to this ceremony, there's another thing going on in the foreground. You see these other figures who are dressed as Florentines. They're actual people in Florence. This is the patron and his son here, and there's other figures, notable people from the contemporary to Ghirlandaio. And there's a classroom. There's a teacher in a classroom coming up the stairs, and this is one scene of people sort of watching this other scene take place. The event of Francis seeing the Pope here, this is something that occurred in the 1300s. So the people watching are from the 1200s. This is from the 1200s, the 13th century, I should say. And these people are from the 1400s. So the event that they're watching is something that had occurred, 2 centuries before. And the place that it's occurring, if you look at these buildings and stuff, it should be Rome is where this happened. But this painting is in Florence. And if we look here, look at this archway here in the middle of these. There's 3 arches here in this building in relation to this building, and this other ones with the round arches. Look at this painting. This is the piazza in Florence. This is the loggia where they have the sculpture, and this is the Uffizi. And this is the Palazzo Pubblico. This is like the big city hall, city center piazza in Florence. There's that building with the arched windows. This is what is being depicted as the place or setting of this event. But I guess you can picture it as these people are sort of seeing a vision or imagining this event that occurred, which is significant because St. Francis is significant. But they've taken it out of the context of Rome where it happened and put it in the middle of Florence. Now, when you look at this picture, there's a bunch of people. Lots of figures. Is complex. It's busy of figures down at the bottom part. And when we look at this upper part, Ghirlandaio has taken the opportunity to get some design in here. I don't know. This seems a little cluttered to me. All these figures, as if he was required to get them all in there. But back here, he has this arch here in this concentric arch above it, and then this other one above it, and another one above it. So you have all these concentric arches of this geometry back there that's parallel to the picture plane that has the effect of bringing this back forward and not looking illusionistically far away. I mean, you can see these little people back here, and that must be very distant. But overall, the impression that this gives is one of design on the surface rather than deep recession of space. And what would cause this to look more like a deep recession of space, that is the lines on the piazza that are covered up by this wall, they're covered up, so you don't see them. So this can be seen as something nearer than what it actually is. When we look down at the bottom of this wall, you see the panel painting. Now the other thing was a fresco. This is a panel painting, so it's on a panel and it's got brighter colors, and we see this nativity story being told. We see Mary praying and the newborn baby Jesus with his halo. The shepherds, the ox and the ass, and Joseph looking out to all this procession of people coming. I guess is the wise men, and way back in the distance you see the Annunciation to the shepherds. Well, we've seen a work very similar to this before. I can compare the two right now. The one on the right is the Portinari altarpiece. It is the work made in Flanders. I mean, this is a Northern European work. And as I mentioned when we looked at this before, that when this was painted, the patron for this was the man, the Medici's, the Florentine Medici bankers associate in Flanders, and he commissioned this from a local painter, and then had it shipped to Florence. And once it got to Florence, it it was like a bomb blowing up in the middle of the city, because people had never seen this kind of realism. And by realism, I'm talking about the surface detail realism of the northern artist. And it you can imagine the patrons in Florence who commission artists to do works. And you see this, it says, I want one like this. And Ghirlandaio made one like this. This is the one we're looking at, the Ghirlandaio Nativity, and this is the Portinari altarpiece on this right side. And they are very similar to one another. If you look at the whole picture of the back at the chapel, the way this altarpiece is related to its paintings on either side, there's patrons kneeling on either side. They're frescoes. But if you look at this entire rectangle as a model, the Portinari altarpiece does have the same scene in the middle with patrons on either side kneeling. So it is very much the same sort of thing happening once again. He's taking all of the elements, Mary kneeling on the ground with her dress spilling out on the surface. In both cases, the Christ child lying on the ground rather than being in the manger. The group of shepherds is very similar. The poses they're in, the two kneeling here and the one in the background, they're very similarly arranged to these. The Annunciation to the shepherds being on a hill in the back of the picture is also the same. So he definitely has seen this altarpiece and has wanted to reimagine the same thing through his own eyes and through his own culture. What he does differently, you can see clearly. I mean, one of the main things is you look at the spatial relationship of everything. Everything is in a clearly defined, ordered space. The hem of Mary's robe spills out onto the ground and makes an oval. That is a circle that has been seen in perspective, so it makes an oval, and it's flat on the ground, just as you expected the ground to be from the point of view that we're looking at the ground. Here, the ground seems tilted up. Mary's clothes just spill around on the ground, creating this, pattern of wrinkles and things that are observed and accurately depicted, but they don't appear to be sitting in space in a measured way, the way Ghirlandaio does it. Also, the relationship of figures to one another and the figures to each other, to the objects around them, and the entire spatial construction is much differently conceived in the North than in the South. One thing that's common in the North is having things that are close up to you and things that are very far away without that much relationship between them. That is, you see the distance as like you're peeking through at distant things. But here, you have sort of a way that you get to the distance. There is a measured transition from the foreground to middle ground to background in a way that you can rationalize the space, I guess it's one way to put it. Let's look at a closer up version. We look at the details. Ghirlandaio has painted the faces and added much more detail, I imagine, that an individual look to each one, different from what he normally would had it not been for the Portinari altarpiece. That when faced with this competition, an altarpiece that is made by somebody from the North who goes in for a huge amount of surface detail, he's required to meet that challenge. So he does it. He has these individualized figures, though they don't look as peasant-like as the ones that Hugo van der Goes did. Look real quick. I mean, these look like they look at particular people, and people who were actually rugged, people who had spent their lives working on farms, and they have a very individualized look, like they're particular people. Whereas Ghirlandaio, these look almost like actors, like he's gone, taking the ideal version of each person, a younger man and a middle-aged man and an old man, and giving them, all these surface characteristics that you can have here. There's a better image of it here. Yeah, it looks more like an actor rather than an actual farmer. But all the surface details and everything that you had in the other, you have here. Same with the presence of these figures of the animals. Looking back, they look like this in the Hugo van der Goes version. Also, so this radical difference in scale with the angels in the figures that the people in the North didn't bother that much with. It didn't concern them that you have very realistic image of figures that are at a different scale from others. In the rational space of the Italians, though, that's not something you can do. They wouldn't have thought of things like that. And I imagine that when the patrons in the audience of the Portinari altarpiece in Florence, when they first saw it, they would see some things that they would admire, and they would probably see things that looked foreign to them, like the spatial relationships, the absence of good drawing. What they would think of as good drawing is showing things properly, and not have that awkwardness that you get in the northern works. One thing another pointed out, just for the iconography that we saw before of the northern works, they having disguising things to have certain meanings to them. They didn't go in for that too much in Italy, but they still did, and in this case, they do have that thing, that kind of thing. This sarcophagus on the ground. This is at one level, it is part of the ruins of the Roman Empire. As when Christ is born, that signals the fall of the Roman Empire. So, nativity scenes often have ruins of Roman structures. There's, this is Roman ruins that have been double duty as the stable where the event occurs. And here's an arch from Roman times, and this sarcophagus is, it's all cracked and old looking. But a sarcophagus also has another meaning. It's in the place of a manger. And a manger, when Mary lays the baby into a manger, the reason is because manger means to eat. Mangiare is the Italian word to eat. A manger is where the farm animals eat their straw and hay. But it also, she laying in the manger is like offering Jesus up as the bread of the Eucharist ceremony. When it was instituted at the Last Supper, Christ broke the bread and offered it to the disciples, saying, "Take this is my body, and eat it." And so the event of the Nativity prefigures that by having Mary put the baby in a manger. But in this case, not only does it mean the Eucharist, the bread of the Eucharist, but the word sarcophagus actually means to eat flesh. It's designed to be a box that you put a dead body into, and the box itself eats the flesh and turns it into a skeleton because it's made of lime. The chemical inside limestone is something that quickly reduces a dead body to bones. So it eats the flesh. That's what sarcophagus means. So it has all these several layers of meaning in this box on the ground. Looking at this object over here, I don't know if there's any particular meaning to it, but this is the saddle, I think, for the donkey. And you can tell that the artist has gone out of his way here to show that he can render, with just as much skill as the folks in the north. Looking at this, I've never seen what an actual one of these objects is in real life, but I imagine that this is an accurate representation of one of them, whatever it is. The textures of the cloth, the leather cover, the fact that it's worn, the wood, everything about it looks like it was done by a northern artist, except that it actually looks accurately drawn in terms of its structure, in addition to its surface detail. Okay, let's go on to the next artist, who's this Botticelli. I'm going to zoom out a little so you can see the whole thing. Botticelli did religious pictures, lots of them, Annunciations, all sorts of he did nativities. But the two that we're going to look at are unusual. I mean, for him and also for the 1400s as a whole. These are mythological subjects, and not just mythological, but allegorical things. You can imagine the Florentines, the rich people, the Medici, surrounding, once they get rich and they sit in their palaces and they surround themselves with smart people, creative people, poets and scholars, artists, and musicians, and they would have evenings where they would talk about Plato and all sorts of theological problems. They would, one of their interests, especially the scholarly interests, was in looking at Plato and other Greek writers, and looking to see if the pagans, what they would call them, if anything you can take out of that and find in harmony with the Christian theology. So looking at Plato, they would see that he talked about different kinds of love. That Venus, for example, represents earthly love and divine love, and they would say there's a parallel, an analog, I guess, between Venus and Mary in Christian theology, and different kinds of mythological things have resonance within the Christian theology, Christian exegetical writings, and also the mythological tales relate to other things. The Medici, this is a painting called the Primavera, I mean spring, and it has mythological references to it that relate, in addition to divine love and the virtues, the graces, referring to the virtues. This mythological scene with Zephyr, the god of wind, blowing air, it's wind, and capturing a nymph, and that nymph turning into Flora, and that means spring. It also refers to natural, or the fecundity of nature, and that because this is sort of a wedding present kind of kind of device. That it is a way to refer to the fecundity of the married couple, and that they would have children. So there's several different things going on in this in terms of its meaning. This painting is, first of all, it kind of looks like a tapestry. Here I have a picture of a tapestry. This is the sort of thing. It is very dark in the background with plants that sort of come out of that darkness, and it makes a big flat pattern with a figure in front of it. So this is an example of a tapestry, and this has that look. It's a painting on a panel, but it has a kind of a tapestry look to it. This carpet of little flowers against a dark background, and this carpet this trees with little oranges and leaves coming out of it are another example of a tapestry-like pattern. And then the figures on top are similar to the tapestry-like things. And all this emphasis on surface texture and pattern, and also linear things. I mean, if you look close at the way the figures are drawn, if I can go even closer, you can see Botticelli is he likes line. I mean, look at the emphasis is on line. Especially when you have a volume of form, the line seems to be here. He's drawn a line around it. You can see the line, and then filled it in with tone. And the tone is I guess weaker than the line. The main thing is the linear pattern that goes from one thing to another, and the rhythms that you get. Especially a wonderful passage here, the Three Graces. The wonderful patterns and rhythms that you get over the whole thing and within parts of it. These straight lines going here, and then the curvy undulating lines moving across, creating a rhythm like a dance across. And dance is a big deal. It is part of this society that I'm talking about, of people talking about religious things, mythological things, Platonic things. Also, dance is part of a mode of expression where people would have certain sort of motions, hand gestures, poses that have meaning, that they express, tell stories, do all sorts of things through dance. And this relationship, these hands in the positions that they're in, the gesture that Venus makes, all have some sort of relationship to this dance. And so there's all sorts of stuff going on. Neat little thing here. This arch. There's a break in the trees that creates an arch, and then there's this darkness around the figure of Venus. And then up here is the Cupid, blindfolded and shooting an arrow. Cupid is the son of Venus, or Aphrodite. Eros, I think is his name. And this linear pattern there, this is like an archway, and these are like the columns on either side, going right down to her foot. And the diagonals, this bend of the tree, the diagonals, and just this undulating rhythm that goes throughout. All sorts of wonderful things in this picture. It's a wonderful thing to look at. It's in the Uffizi. It's right next to the Birth of Venus, which we're going to see next. But look at this. Look at the feet. When you look at the feet, you see them are, first of all, they're drawn accurately. They're drawn as objects in space, seen from the angle that they're seen at, in such a way that they are accurate to that point of view, each one. And the fact that there are 3 sets of them, all in different poses, so that the artist is able to show that he can render them accurately. If you do figure drawing, you know how difficult this is. This is just a virtuoso performance of drawing the whole thing. I understand also that these flowers are perfect reproductions, botanical illustrations of the flowers that they represent, and they each have some sort of a meaning, a symbolic meaning. I don't know what they are. I haven't looked into it, but they said there's 190 or so different flowers that are represented, and many of them are identified as particular species. So it's a very beautiful thing, and it's a very unusual thing. The artist didn't have the opportunity to do these kind of paintings very many times. I mean, the mythological scenes, and also ones that for which there's no precedent for. When you do anything in a religious picture, most of them have already been done any number of times, so that an artist is sort of locked into a composition before he even starts. You know, say an Annunciation or a Madonna and Child enthroned. There's just, you know, it's been done so many times, and you have to do it traditionally. But there's no tradition for this. This is a one-off, one-of-a-kind thing. Next, we have the birth of Venus. We can zoom so you can see the whole thing. This is a little bit later than the Primavera, and they're kind of like a pair, and they're displayed as a pair in the Uffizi right now, right next to each other. They're about the same size. They're very kind of large, like 9 or 10 feet wide. This one is also the same sort of thing. This is the same character from before that was on the right. The wind, Zephyr, wind blowing, and this is the nymph that he caught, who's Flora, and she's got flowers, you know, floating in the air around her. This is Venus, who's in mythology, she was born of the sea foam. She's just created by the sea foam, and she was blown to the shore riding on this shell with as her boat. So the wind is blowing her, and she's coming to shore. But understand that this one and the other one are allegories. Ideas are being represented by real things, and the real things are the things that the art is depicting, but they have meanings apart from their feet. That's why they're real strange. You don't usually see people floating in the air and people blowing to indicate the idea of wind, but in the world of this sort of intellectual world of people talking about Plato and theological subjects and trying to find resonances between one world of thought and another, they come up with all sorts of weird ideas, and then when they want to picture them, they get an artist to do that, and this is what he came up with to picture the ideas that they're expressing. Venus here, I guess would be the earthly love, whereas the other one is more the divine love of Venus, and that it still relates in some way to Mary, but it's also a nude figure of a woman who's standing exposed, but at the same time is covering herself in modesty, in the same way as a Greek statue by Praxiteles was doing, what's called the modest Venus or Aphrodite figure. But when you think of that statue and the pose that it makes, with the hand covering the breast, and just looking, not looking at you and looking, like this, not being overt. It doesn't look so much like the statue as almost like a cutout. The modeling that you see, you can zoom in on the modeling, is so subtle, and it goes from a light to a dark that's almost the same as the light. It doesn't have the same volumetric feeling that you would expect to a figure, even if you're thinking of it as like a sculpture. Out in the sun with light shining on it, the shadows would be darker. But here, the light and dark is almost the same, as if the emphasis is not on the volumetric rendering, but on the line. And here, even more so than the Primavera, the lines are very overt. The black line that goes around the toes and around the edge. This is not something you usually see in paintings. This is more like you see in comics. They have a black line filled in with flat color, And here, instead of flat color, it's almost flat color. Um, it's very low contrast. Zooming out, another thing I wanted to point out about the composition is that this modeling I'm talking about makes the figures almost like a cutout, like a flat thing. And when you see of her as a cutout, like a paper doll almost, um, look at this line of the horizon going right through her navel. It's almost as if she's attached by the navel, like she's pinned to the background as a paper doll would be, because of that dot right there on the line. And it's this the sea, which is really close here and really far away over here, is not indicated as being close and far. It has these waves, a sort of a symbolic version of waves, I guess, that makes a pattern on the surface that looks flat. And so you have this flat rectangle back there and this other flat rectangle, which is the sky, meet together as a line. Even though there's a little bit of a landscape back there, it's still a line that goes right through her navel. So it's composed uh, um, linearly, and geometrically. It's got a rhythm of lines, like these lines here that are next to the the right edge of the composition. These are parallel to it, but they develop a rhythm that goes across, and as it moves to the left, um, it becomes an undulating line, and and it undulates all the way through this figure, in turbulently, just until it gets to this. Um, I guess this would be the neck of the piece of cloth that she's bringing to clothe Venus. But it is paralleled by the silhouette of Venus here, especially with her hair like this undulating line. So it repeats many times as you go through this figure, and then as it gets towards uh, the right edge of the format, it becomes straight lines. So that becomes a rhythm. It's sort of a dance-like rhythm that moves across. Together, this pair, they're wonderful examples of what they are, but apparently they're also the only examples of what they are. They're beautifully rendered. I mean, if you look at the close up of the painting, um, wonderfully detailed, beautiful calligraphy of the locks of hair, and just the tonality of it, the linear pattern of it is beautiful. The idealized face is a wonderful face, and it's elegant and charming in every way. Uh, um, the fact that it has this mythological, religious, theological kind of background meaning to it is, I don't know, is kind of a, I mean, to some extent, it's kind of an excuse to just to have a pretty picture, and a very secular picture in one's house. I imagine when this was made, it was sort of a private thing. That is, uh, the people and his, the patron and his friends who he would show to impress them as his erudition, his taste in painting and artist, and his knowledge of all these allegorical, mythological things. But you can imagine he probably wouldn't let a representative of the church in to see it, because it would be difficult to explain just how this relates to Christianity. Moving to the next artist, we have Giovanni Bellini, and unlike these other Italians we've been looking at, he's Venetian, and this Venice is very different from both Florence and Urbino. Its climate is different. It has It's on the water. It's a humid place. It's northern. It's a place where it's on a crossroads. It was a what do you call it? A merchandise center. They would have lots of ships coming in from all over the world, and so they knew about the rest of the world. They weren't so as isolated, I guess, as you might say, as Florence would be. Florence, it had its own culture and it's very isolated, and they didn't for a long time. They didn't know what was going on in the rest of the world in terms of the the way art was in the rest of the world. They had their own style. It was very strong, and it wasn't until much later, until this second half of the 1400s, they start being influenced by the North. But Venice is much more farther north, and it's closer to the northern artist, and they would have much more opportunities to see northern art, and also, and it had been for a much longer time. In addition, it had much more influence by Byzantine art. It was, it had trade with Byzantium, and it would, a lot of the artists there came to Venice. The architecture in there is kind of Byzantine, and especially St. Mark's and the mosaics inside. You can see that it has very early Christian-looking things, and like this representation within this painting by Bellini of something that is much older than his style. This is the kind of thing that you would see in St. Mark's. It was an apse, the semi-dome over an apse with gold mosaics and these figures. I guess they come from Revelation with the six wings. This all has this ancient art look to it, but the whole of Venice, I mean, it is this blend of the sort of the pageantry, the gold, the glitter, from medieval times, especially the Byzantine works. It also has influence from northern artists, like we've been studying with the super detailed surfaces. It also has influence from Florence. So you get in this picture a blending of all these things together. Also, this is much later in the progress. That is, when you think of the 1300s and 1400s in Florence as a progression from Giotto up to 1500, this progression towards naturalism and idealism, and the control of the tools of representing things in space, lighted figures, the control of how figures look in space, and the surface detail, all those things that we see as a progress. This is sort of at the pinnacle of that, where this artist is in complete control of perspective and rendering objects in space, the tonality that you get from light and shadow, and making consistent lighting, consistent points of view throughout the whole picture. So we've got all the things in one go here. What we have is a Madonna and Child enthroned, and this is something that Bellini, Giovanni Bellini, did many of, and I've chosen this one because this is the one in the Stockdat book. But he has many others that are really similar to it. It has several saints, and this one happens to be in a church of I believe of Saint Job Church, and Job is identified here as one of the saints, and there's Francis and Sebastian, the one with the arrows in it. Bellini was from a painting family, and his brother-in-law was Mantegna, so we saw Mantegna before. He was a northern artist, and he's very much influenced by the Florentines in terms of his clarity of vision, I guess you could say, and his figures, and the clearness of his space, and in his perspective. Though he did have some surface detail that you could attribute to northern influence, but this sort of radically foreshortened view, the view where the horizon line is at the bottom of the painting, is something that Mantegna had done. So this is the brother-in-law of Bellini. So Bellini uses that is these lines, these orthogonal lines of the chapel. I guess this is supposed to depict, comes down to the bottom of the picture, so that your eye level is right at the feet of the saints, and so you're looking up at everything. Similar to what Masaccio did. But you can look at the Masaccio. It does have the same sort of barrel vault at the top. It has pilasters right here. It's got an arch. It has several elements that Masaccio did. But and if Bellini ever went to Florence and saw the Masaccio, he would have, he would do something from 100 years prior. Maybe not 100, but how many years? More than 50 years prior. And they'd come a long way, and he's demonstrating here that he can render as well as anyone ever could the perspective of such a barrel vault, and also maintaining a consistent lighting, probably a lighting that is consistent with the lighting of the church. Probably comes in here from the right down onto these figures, so everything is consistent with it. Let's look at the close-up of just the figures. You can see that it's practically photographic in its the clarity of everything. Each of the figures, the perfectly proportioned figures with contrapposto pose. The light on the figures is all consistent with the shadows and everything. The angels in this sitting at the throne at the feet of Mary, each in a different pose, holding a musical instrument that are difficult to draw in space, and chosen so that they would be demonstrate the artist's skill in representing things in space. The halos being reduced to this thin gold band. I think of this, a rationale for making them thin gold bands is that they need to have halos because they're saints and they have to be shown as saintly. So you have to have a halo, but it is so much like nature. They've looked at everything in nature so as to depict skin and bone and flesh and cloth and marble, whatever, exactly as you see it in the real world, and you don't see halos in the real world. So he's minimizing those things that are the supernatural elements, and maximizing everything that would be a real thing, so that you look at these people and you identify with them as if they're real people. Okay, consider how this looks. Mary on the throne, the way the throne looks, the space and lighting and the reality of it, and compare that to the other examples of Madonna and Child enthroned that we've seen before. Because when we get to the test, we'll be comparing things, and when you compare two things, the first thing you do when you look at the comparison is to say, why were these put together? And if you saw this with, say, I don't know, Giotto's Madonna and Child enthroned, or Cimabue, if you saw them paired together, then you would say, well, why were they put together? Well, because they're both the same subject matter, and because they're rendered and their style is so different, is an opportunity to point out what that style is. So you would talk about the Giotto or Cimabue style, and relate it to this, and talk about that progression that I mentioned before. Of course, this could also be compared to another, like a northern painting, in which case you would deal with those aspects. Let's look at the last picture here. This is also by Bellini, but this is an exterior figure in a landscape. It's St. Francis receiving the stigmata. You can't see all the picture. There. You can see all of it. St. Francis is here, standing on the ground with with his eyes up to heaven and his arms out, he received the stigmata. That is, he went into the wilderness and lived like a hermit, fasted and prayed until he received an ecstatic vision and was given the gift of receiving the scars on his hands and his feet that Christ had. And so this is a depiction of that event as a man with a monk's robe, looking like St. Francis, in a wilderness area where you can see that, it's very distant from this distant town, and, rocks and the sort of primitive world that he lives in. I guess there's a cave and, a handmade little fence here and this little table that he sits and reads and looks at has a skull here to remind him of death and everything. So, and also, symbolic animals here that relate to, patience and things. And is an extremely naturalistically rendered world. I wanted to show you this in contrast to, say, a picture by Van Eyck of the way the same thing was rendered by a northern artist. You have St. Francis receiving the stigmata. You see the holes in his hand and in his feet. This is the cross that he sees, this is part of his vision. Anyway, it has the same sort of elements. You have a monk here in a monk's robe, and you have rocks. You have a distant landscape. But there's a sort of the difference of conception of this painting, or the difference in the way the artists conceived the worlds that they're painting, is illustrative of the difference between a northern artist and an Italian artist. Now, among Italian artists, this is a very northern influenced picture by Bellini. By being from Venice, it's much more colorful. It has a super amount of detail. I mean, we can look at close up and you can see all the leaves and grass and the reality of every surface has been observed. The shadows. This is kind of looks like it's done by a northern painter. When we actually look at a northern painter doing the same thing, there are some differences. Like, for example, look at the figure of Francis in relationship to his figure in relation to the cloth that's all around him. This monk's habit, and his feet sort of stick out here in the back, but there doesn't seem to be that much of a clear indication of his body underneath, and the relationship of his feet to, say, his knees, and the size of his hands, the position of his head. There seems to be a kind of a disjunction going on, as if the artist were so concerned about the surface and the folds of the cloth that he just knew that the hands stuck out somewhere and feet stuck out somewhere, but as far as what's going on underneath, he's not that interested in. So it's the surface that's the important thing. Also, he looks close up at these figures and the things that are close up. There's a very real foreground thing, and then there's a very real background thing, but there's not that much in between to go from foreground to background, so much so as what Bellini did here, where you see foreground, you see the very distance, but you can see all the steps all the way back into the distance. And the other contrast is you can see that this figure of St. Francis is, you can see where his knee is, you can see where his foot is, and you can see that underneath this robe there is an accurate representation of a figure, even though we don't see it, we can tell that it's there. Everything is in the right place. Everything looks naturalistic and proper, as if it was made by somebody who studied as an apprentice with skeleton and nude, and understood the figure and how it was represented and how the cloth moves around it, and understood that even before he became a master himself. And now that when he draws a figure and he paints a figure, you can see it under there, that he has the knowledge of anatomy underneath this cloth. not the same is not as true of the northern artists. They are so almost as if they're looking at the world through a lens, magnifying lens, and to the exclusion of seeing the bigger picture. You can see a little bit more the little rabbit here. So this big distinction I'm making between North and South, I mean, is uh, it works to a certain extent. I mean, especially when you're going from Florence to Flanders, for example, it's a huge contrast between the two. But when you get from Venice to the north, the contrast is less. We do have Florentine features, but you also have Venetian features. That is this interest in more in color and also surface detail. But at the same time, they maintain the the drawing qualities that the folks in Florence would love. Okay, that's enough. That's enough before the mid